My name is Luke Painter. I am an assistant professor here in drawing and painting, but I've also taught in integrated media and printmaking. I've been the chair of printmaking and for 2 years, and I was the chair of printmaking and painting for 1 year here. So I'm a tenure track professor, and I've been here, I've taught since 2006, sessionally, and then CLTA, and then tenure track. I teach a number of different things here. I teach traditional processes. I've taught things like intaglio printmaking, which is what some people consider traditional type of image making, printing from metal plates. I've taught HTML, I've taught animation, 3D animation. I've taught traditional painting processes. I'm kind of all over the place. I just sort of pick up whatever I'm interested in and I start working with it. If it's printmaking or acrylic painting or 3D modeling, I'm interested in all of it. Yeah. I work mostly in ink on paper. So this is a work that is from this past year, but you know, it looks like it's just ink on paper, but I model it in a 3D program first, and then I end up using that 3D model as the basis for my drawing. And so I do sort of a lot of like large scale drawing. This is a bit of a smaller one. I'm interested in how art movements, styles from architecture and design from the past are translated and revived at different points in history. So for example, this piece is called Drapes, Deco to Memphis Milano, and it's a linear progression of Art Deco in the 20th century. So it starts off with 1920s Art Deco, and it goes up to the 1940s, so it goes these 3 different drapes, and it morphs and changes from this floral pattern to these more geometric, and then it skips 40 years and goes through the 80s, so it's Memphis Milano. But there's a real interesting connection, of course, between those different decades, and I'm really interested in that, that stylistic revival that happens. And then I do some animation work as well. So this is a piece that I completed last year. It's called Baffin Island's Fortress of Solitude. So basically it's Lauren Harris's Baffin Island painting. It's an iconic painting from, you can see it in the AGO right now. But I was really interested in Lauren Harris's style, which is very graphic and very unusual, I think, for that time period, and different than the other group of 7 in Canada. And so I was drawing similarities between in 1930 when this painting is made with this Superman is basically developed by a Canadian at the exact same period of time. And so I was trying to draw some similarities between the graphic characteristics of both of those things, the Lauren Harris and this 1930s comic book, the golden age of comic books, which starts around then. So I do 3D animation, but it's also very much referencing and connecting very seemingly disparate things from the past, but actually do have connections. You know, in the past few years, I've been teaching 3D animation. I find 3D animation so interesting, 3D modeling and animation really interesting, because it's constantly changing, and artists are constantly changing how they're using it. I really enjoy that the software itself at one point, the developers of software are trying to get as true to reality as possible. But there's things within the software that I try to point out to students that are real deviations within that type of purpose. One of those things, for example, because we have this history of trying to make something look as realistic as possible, taking an object in 3D, it looks like it's made of glass, and you can drop it, animate it, so it's dropping, it has gravity, and then between one frame and another, it changes properties completely from glass to water. So there's this, there's this real sense that you can mess with the reality, even though it's been trying to get to this point where it's so perfect, right? So I try to find things I try to have students be self-reflexive of the materials, which is the software that they're using, find out what the purpose of the software is and try to work with it in really different ways. So, you know, in terms of somebody like, I would show somebody like Corey Archangel, who had a big show in Montreal we took our students to, and he has these gigantic works that are of a Photoshop gradient. So they're just a printout, like a digital printout, and it shows a red to a blue, and it's just that gradient. And it's huge, and it really decontextualizes that action in Photoshop, which has its a whole comeback. Like the gradient has had a weird comeback, and then, you know, when the gradient first came out, people were using it became very passé, and then it's had a comeback. Having students look at artists who utilize those tools, but they're also self-referential of those tools within their own practices. So I'm always looking for artists that are like that. We try to get students to do everything in this course. So this is one example, actually. This is a student who really concentrated a year and a half ago, on creating a longer narrative. And so it's interesting is that in art school, a lot of the time, narrative is not given as much respect, I think, than other types of ways of working, I would say. And but we're really trying to encourage our students to work in a narrative way, to storyboard. And so this particular student used the tablets here and created this, like, I think it's about 10 minutes long narrative, storyboarded it all out. I worked with her on the music. I worked with her on the pacing of it. And so it's of a particular challenge. It's like a long-term, it's a year challenge to make something along these lines. And we have our DPXA, Digital Painting Expanded Animation capstone course that is new this year, which I'm teaching, that we're gonna have students produce projects like this. And so within DPXA, for example, our students can do something narrative like this. They can do work that's like a Sherry Boyle or a Daniel Barrow, where they're like drawing and they're projecting it on the wall. There's like that back and forth between projection and drawing and it's experiential space. And so we want our students to be able to go towards the more commercial end of things, but then also have those self-reflexive artworks that end up in a museum type of setting or a performative-based setting as well.
Just what tools did they learn in that class?
Yeah, so we keep changing it. So that's the thing. So this past year, I was teaching them 3D from Cinema 4D. So basically, I would get them to do. This is a good question, but you're like, what do they do in these classes? So basically, what I had them do was I had them create compositions in Cinema 4D, so they're 3D compositions, modeling, but also just taking stuff off the internet, putting it into a digital space. And then they end up using that. They use one scene that they can rotate around and have different viewpoints to create 3 different paintings, analog paintings from. So you end up getting paintings that look so different than stuff that is made that usually students make, I find, because of that forced perspective that often comes with 3D modeling and animation. It's very much about a perspectival space. And so they make these 3 paintings during that, and then they end up using that scene to do an animation from. Lauren's really interesting in that I had her in 2 different classes, and she makes these digital works. They look like paintings. Some of them she does painted, and then some of them she does digitally. So this looks digital, and that's painted. So she'll utilize some of those tropes of the gradient. Alex McLeod, of course, is one of our students. Yeah. He was in the first class that I taught here, and he's just been like very successful at what he's done in all sorts of different ways. Because the interesting thing, I'll just say this last thing, is that the interesting thing about him is that he's using some of this technology in a way that mixed with a lot of his experience here at OCAD specifically, like in terms of color, like thinking about color, or thinking about being very self-referential. And so you get a lot of, these lighting setups reflected in the objects themselves, or he'll take the light and he sticks it into an object, and then it does this weird refracting sort of thing. It's something that a Pixar, like of course Pixar people would do things like that, they're self-reflexive, but he kind of is looking for that very fake sort of stage setup.
But that's all modeled in Cinema 4D, right?
Yeah, yeah. Getting students to interact with each other is kind of the most important thing. And so, a lot of our studio seminar courses are set up in the last couple of years to use Canvas so that students are talking to each other, not necessarily in like a chat form, but in just one student poses a question and then some other students try to answer that question through that. And setting up expectations through Canvas for students every week to use it, I think is great. Colette LaLiberte has been doing that in her contemporary issues, and that's translated into our other studio seminar courses. So getting students to use Canvas and to interact with each other. It's not such a far reach because they're already doing these sorts of things online, and a lot of times they feel even more comfortable doing it online than they do in real life. So I think finding strategies to use Canvas and having students interact with each other through it, I think, is pretty useful.
Right on. Thanks for your time.
No problem.